Wyoming PBS, in partnership with Wyoming Public Media and the Wyoming Business Report, are proud to bring you Election 2014, Wyoming's Primary Choices.
Good evening and welcome to Election 2014, Wyoming's Primary Choices. This is the second night in a series of debates among candidates in contested races in Wyoming's August primary elections. Tonight we have three candidates, Republican candidates, for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Also, we want to note that there is one Democratic candidate for the office, and Wyoming viewers, we hope, will get to hear from him during our upcoming general election debates. We're in the Little Theater on the campus of Central Wyoming College, and I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. With me in the studio are Wyoming journalists Tom Lawrence and Aaron Schrank. Tom is the managing editor of the Balow Tribune, and Aaron is an education reporter from Wyoming Public Media. Aaron and Tom, welcome to you both. Wyoming voters who have not cast absentee ballots will head to the polls August 19th, and it's our goal tonight to provide an opportunity for voters to connect with the candidates and hear from them as they debate side by side, discussing issues that are important to Wyoming. I want to now introduce our three candidates, and then we'll briefly review the rules and formats of tonight's debate. Sheryl Lain was born in Powell, where her father taught agriculture at Powell High School and was raised there with her five sisters. Sheryl graduated from the University of Wyoming and, following her father's footsteps, began her teaching career at the Wind River High School in 1968. Sheryl has worked in schools as a teacher, administrator, instructional coach, and facilitator, and currently serves as the instructional leader in the Office of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Sheryl, welcome.
Thank you.
Bill Winney has a Bachelor of Science degree from the U.S. Naval Academy in Oceanography and has a master's degree in engineering. Mr. Winney gave 30 years of active duty service, led the Virginia-class attack submarine acquisition program for 2 years, was a chalkboard teacher for 2 years, and was directly responsible for officer studies and supervised enlisted student training on one of 4 crews at the Nuclear Power Training Unit in Idaho Falls. Mr. Winney, welcome.
Good to be here.
Jillian Balow is a graduate of Campbell County High School and has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Education from the University of Wyoming. She also has a secondary and middle school English and Language Arts endorsements from Black Hills State University, and has a master's degree in education and has 10 years experience in the classroom. Jillian has administrative experience at both the Department of Family Services and the State Department of Education. Jillian, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's talk about how tonight's debate will flow. Tom, Aaron, and I will alternate asking questions to the candidates, and each candidate will take turns in answering each question first. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer a question, and the first to answer will be allowed a 20-second rebuttal answer. Candidates, we encourage you to watch the green, amber, and red signals. When the light glows red, you may complete your thought and finish your sentence, but that means your time will be up. We want to remind our audience to hold their applause until the end of tonight's debate. In the middle of the debate, we'll have what we call a lightning round, where each candidate will have 20 seconds each to respond to a 1- or 2-word phrase, and there will be no rebuttals during the lightning round. With that, we're ready to start tonight's debate, and Tom Lawrence of the Balow Tribune will ask tonight's first question.
Mrs. Lain, with all the turmoil in the State Superintendent of Public Instruction office, what makes you more qualified than your opponents to hold that position?
Well, thank you for the question. As Craig said, I'm Sheryl Lain, and I'm glad all of you are listening tonight. I am a Wyoming educator since 1968, starting here in this district and in this county, and I have experience from the classroom to senior leadership at the WDE. I've worked in the majority of Wyoming schools, and wherever I work, the scores have improved, whether at Star Valley High or ARP Elementary or Meadowlark or Cary Junior High. Besides my work in Wyoming, I have a national reputation as an author and a speaker, lecturing widely in the United States. Wyoming people have told me, to answer your question, people have told me what they really want now and what the legislature wants is to, let's go back to the days when we were #1 in the United States in schools. And I know how to accomplish this. I know how because I've had a history, a record, a proven record of success. So what we need to do is to refocus our attention from the federalizing of education, including Common Core, back to the parents and teachers and students at the heart of education. We've got to take back our schools to the local level and stop the micromanaging from the federal and state government, and this includes Common Core. We have to give our local boards the power and authority to give the teachers back their professionalism so they can teach and reach every student. I think that what we need to do is get to work, and boy, were we working those first 2 years before SF 104. We were busy out in the state everywhere, and what happened was scores went up. We had a third fewer schools in improvement with the special ed population. Scores went up in every content area. Scores went up in every grade level, up to 17 points in reading. And this is because I believe the focus was on instruction, and that's what the people wanted when they elected Cindy Hill. I don't think that that looks like disruption. I think that looks like hard work.
Sheryl, Lain, thank you. Mr. Winney, same question.
Well, across my 30 years of active duty in the Navy, I served in Washington, D.C. several times, and I saw bureaucracies from the inside. And so when I came back to Wyoming after I retired, I chose to go down to the legislature, and I've done that for 10 years, beginning to end. And about 6 years ago, I started paying close attention to education. And I did that for 2 reasons. First of which, probably most important, I observed my wife teach across those 30 years wherever we landed. And in a number of places, I saw the good and bad of school administration. Another reason, along my time on active duty, I served 2 years as a teacher in the Navy Nuclear Propulsion Program. That paid me dividends across my career. When I served as a chief engineer and as a commanding officer on a nuclear sub, the fact that I had learned and understood how people learn made a difference. At the end of the day, the superintendent needs to have worn the shoes of a teacher, but it is also important when you talk bureaucracies and those kind of things that they bring skills beyond the classroom.
Thank you. Mrs. Balow.
Thank you. Now more than ever, Wyoming needs a state superintendent who understands education, has the ability and desire to bring all stakeholders in education together and move past the chaos and turmoil of the last 4 years. I have experience leading large state departments. I have experience in education, and I am that candidate. I spent a decade teaching in Wyoming classrooms, and I know firsthand that education begins with students, teachers, parents, local school district professionals, and local school boards. I've spent the last 8 years as a state government executive leader, and I have been in charge of budgets exceeding $100 million and hundreds of staff members across the state. I know how to streamline work. I know how to reduce bureaucracy. I know how to fight federal encroachment and make government work better for the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to our longer form questions. Ms. Balow, you'll answer first. And then there'll also be an opportunity, or excuse me, Mr. Winney, you'll answer first. There'll also be an opportunity for a 20-second rebuttal. Aaron?
Mr. Winney, Wyoming is one of 10 states that does not offer public preschool to children. What can be done to better prepare our students entering kindergarten, and what role, if any, should the Wyoming Department of Education play in that?
Early childhood education is important. My wife's bachelor's degree was in early childhood. She later got a master's degree mid-career in reading education. But I observed her as we taught and as she taught in those many places across a career, elementary school amongst them. And young people in that age bracket are learning how to learn. That is of vast importance that we take and pay attention to that thing. On the other hand, how do we keep from building a nanny state where the state is putting out education and telling people how to do things from birth? That's not what the people of this state want, and that's not what I've heard at the doors around the state as I've knocked on doors and traveled since early June. And so we get on with that, we got to do it, and I will put that in place.
Thank you, Ms. Balow.
Great. As an administrator at the Department of Family Services, I led efforts in the state of Wyoming to coordinate and streamline efforts in early education among state agencies. That led to legislation that was passed this last session to set up a grant program for Wyoming communities to plan, development, or enhance local efforts. Let me be clear, this is not public preschool, this is not mandated preschool, it's not even preschool. It's honoring the local efforts that are taking place all across our state and making sure that children from diverse backgrounds, whether they're at home, whether they're in preschool, whether they're in home care, or with a friend, family, and neighbor, have an opportunity to acquire the skills and the abilities that they need to be successful in school. The best thing that the state can do is remove barriers at the community level so that local communities can be successful with their own efforts to make sure that early education needs are met in their community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
Thank you. Wyoming we're very lucky here. We have a huge array of options for children, from public to private environments for children. When Even Start was stopped, the legislature went in, and by the feds, the legislature went in and picked that up and is funding it. So I would like to offer the idea that in lieu of having a statewide preschool, public supported preschool program, that we do some deep studying about just who will we be, what private preschools will we be eliminating, church-based preschools, school-based preschools. All of these are in operation now. And I'm not convinced that we have thoroughly examined this to see that the need is there. So I agree that Wyoming people are really not interested in pursuing mandatory preschool and the concomitant expense.
Thank you, Mr. Winney. A 20-second rebuttal if you would like.
Well, it's interesting. We have something like 50 programs that address that age bracket, that preschool. They're spread across a number of departments. Some of those, probably most of those, probably ought to be brought back into the Department of Education, although not all of them. The other thing is we got to be very careful that whatever we do put in place does not compete with the private organizations that are already there.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the next question. And Ms. Balow, you're first. If we want to know as a state that our students are competitive with students from other states, how can that be done?
The role of the Department of Education is to provide a state framework of standards, to provide advocacy for school districts in a quality education system, to provide stable and adequate funding, and to assistance to districts in maneuvering and navigating through federal rules and regulations. Among those duties of the state is to provide a framework of state standards and then allow for local school districts to have the flexibility of local control over curriculum, teaching pedagogy, and teaching materials. This is one way that we can ensure that our students are competitive both locally, nationally, and internationally. Let me back up and say that currently Wyoming has adopted the Common Core state standards. Those were done perhaps with not enough input from the public, and I believe that we need to have a more robust and inclusive process to make sure that those standards are Wyoming standards and not nationalized standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lain.
As I stated in my opening, I'm very concerned about the federalizing of education, which includes the rush to the Common Core standards and the subsequent interest in the next generation standards, which are now off the table. The way that the Common Core standards came into Wyoming came in sort of a shadow way. The former superintendent in 2009 sent out a letter to the district saying that we would adopt the Common Core standards when they weren't even written yet. And of course, that is not our rules. There are many other reasons why, besides that we didn't follow our own rules in adopting and promulgating those standards, that the Common Core standards are not the answer for any kind of comparison nationally. You know, it's really, I think, a misunderstanding. We have had National Assessment of Educational Progress for years, which is a national assessment. It gives the feds and all of us a look in being able to compare ourselves with other states. that is in place, and I think it's robust enough, and it represents that sort of lean approach to what I think is an appropriate approach to assessments at the national level.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
Well, we first have to figure out what we want for standards. And as I've observed our legislature over the years, they tend to focus all too much on college ready, and they kind of leave out our young people that choose to go into trade skills. And we have to make room for them. On the other hand, the real goal is for our young people that are going to college to be ready when they walk in the door. And if you look at the scorecards, we're not doing so well on that. And so how do we go forward with that? I call what's going on with Common Core the industrialization. People frequently call it federalization, but you get the idea, industrialization of education. And it's where you have the top-down definition of standards and goals and everything, instead of letting our people and our school boards do what is specified. If you look at Article 7, Section 11 of the Constitution, it says nobody else specifies textbooks. That's the language of 1889, but I think that gives us guidance for today.
Thank you. A rebuttal.
Yes, a clear line of distinction. My opponent, Ms. Lain, opposes Common Core, however, was part of the leadership that adopted the Common Core in 2012. Additionally, Ms. Lain traveled the state and the nation training teachers to embed the Common Core in their teaching. Thank you.
Tom Lawrence from the Powell Tribune.
The very title of the job you're all seeking is Superintendent of Public Instruction. But as the Powell Tribune reported today, all three of you have had your children in private schools. How do you explain that apparent dichotomy?
Mrs. Lain, you're first with that answer.
Thank you. You know, I think that the first and most fundamental work of a parent is to decide what's appropriate for each and every child. I have 4 children. All 4 of them did graduate from Wyoming public high schools, and for the very most part of all their lives attended public high schools, as did my husband and myself. My husband is a Riverton Wolverine, and here we are in Riverton. I'm a Powell Panther. I completely believe in the public school, but I also believe in options. And for 1 year, we were so lucky that we had an option for one of our children to attend a parochial school, which I thought was great. And then he chose to go back to the public high school. So this is a public mission for me. I've been a public school educator my entire life, and I believe in the need and the power of the public school. It's what I think is essential to a democracy.
Thank you so much. Mr. Winney.
Well, across my 30 years of active duty, my wife and I moved 19 times. The good news is our young people, the 3 boys we had, only moved 7 of those 19 times. Across those years, they were in both public and private schools, depending on what we felt was good for them. My 2 older boys graduated from public high schools in Northern Virginia. My youngest boy, because of the amount of time that I was going to spend in different places, Hawaii, Washington, D.C., and then retirement here in Wyoming, my youngest boy, we chose to put in a 4-year private high school. But it was back and forth across the career. So we put them in the best place we thought, consistent with what my career was calling of me and calling of my family and my wife, who had to keep the family working and keep their education going. 2 of my 3 boys are graduates at UW. The 3rd one is in UW right now after a 5-year hitch in the Marine Corps, and I hope he will be finishing up here in about a year to a year and a half.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
As a teacher in Wyoming public schools, I know that public school works for most of the kids most of the time. As a parent of a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old who are both in public school now, I am grateful to have had the option of putting them in Christian school. That was a faith-based choice. That was not based on the quality of public education or the quality of public schools in our area. In fact, I uphold the option and the right of parents to choose what education is most appropriate for their children, and I'm grateful to have had that choice as well. I honor the concept of hybrid educations, whether that be virtual, private, homeschool, public school, or a mixture of all of those things. Wyoming needs to move beyond the bricks and mortar concept of the traditional classroom and consider that Wyoming parents deserve choices in education.
Thank you. Ms. Lain, a rebuttal.
Ms. Balow suggested that I was a Common Core supporter because I went out and did staff development with the Common Core, and I would like to correct that. When I was a senior in high school, our debate topic was resolved, should we have federal aid to education? I got to choose, and I chose the negative. Really, all my life I've been a conservative and felt that the real power of education belongs right at the local level and not with the feds. But once those standards were adopted, and rules promulgated, my job as instructional leader was to get out and demystify these standards for the Wyoming teachers.
Thank you. Next question from Aaron Schrank, and Mr. Winney, you'll answer first.
As schools and education agencies grow more reliant on the collection and exchange of student data in tracking education outcomes, how would you work to ensure the privacy of students and teachers is protected?
I've spoken in front of the legislature on that as a private citizen. There was a bill just this past session, and what I spoke to them about it comes from the perspective of what does it take to put in place the security that you need to collect the amount of data that they were talking about in front of them. And quite simply, the amount of data that was proposed in the bill in that legislation was pretty vast. And based on my experience in the Navy and with various elements of cryptology, and I served at a time on a blue ribbon task group that went in and looked at a cryptology type failure in the National Security Agency there in Maryland. And I simply said to Chairman Teeters, if you're going to do what you propose, be ready for the cost, because you don't understand how costly that's going to be. And so until the legislature is ready to step up to that level of security, we need to not do what they're talking about.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Great. I have grave concerns about the collection of data and the invasion of privacy of Wyoming citizens. Let me tell you about my record. I've been involved in the work of the state longitudinal data system for the past several years in several capacities. Recently, I recommended that our agency not move forward with an agreement because I was not comfortable with the agreement as it was stated, that it kept data of our citizens secure, and I felt like there was data collection for the sake of data collection. So I recommended that our agency not move forward with that. As state superintendent, I will continue to lead efforts to assure that data is secure, that that individual student data stays within a school, and that we collect data only for the appropriate and purposeful use of program improvement and student performance. Thank you.
Ms. Lain.
I am very worried about the state longitudinal data system for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is a privacy factor for our students. Let's take a look at one of the reasons. My perception of this, and I believe it's based on fact, is that what we did with the whole process of collecting data is add a whole new agency to the state government and increase the bureaucracy. This is a large agency with many staff members, and I am against growing government. We already have experienced the growth of government in Wyoming. It's up. It's tripled in the last 15 years. The budgets have tripled. And so I really am worried about collecting data for the whole purpose of growing bureaucracy. But second of all, we need to be very careful. There are 400 additional data points being asked about kids, such as their parents' religion, and if the child had any behavior problems, if he had a lisp when he was little. And we have altogether too many data points on children that are a privacy issue.
Thank you. Mr. Winney, a rebuttal.
Well, I'd like to just make clear that because of the knowledge I have as what it'll take to put the right kind of security in place, that I do not think Wyoming should implement the longitudinal data system.
Thank you. I'm next. Ms. Balow. In Fremont County, there are 8 school districts. In Wyoming, there are 49 school districts. Does Wyoming have too many school districts?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Let me say that in the past, we had, I think, something like 102 districts. So we are making progress. I certainly see areas where we can combine staff and streamline processes in state government, or excuse me, in school districts, so that some of our smaller districts don't have perhaps 2 business managers, 2 superintendents, and maybe are able to share some of those duties and some of those dollars. In terms of having too many school districts, we have 48 unique school districts in Wyoming, and each of those has their own flavor, their own fabric that needs to be addressed in a variety of ways. As state superintendent, I would not move to reduce the number of school districts in Wyoming, but I would work to assure that all 48 unique districts' needs are met, that they are supported uniquely, and that they are part of a larger system where they are honored and upheld for their successes and assisted with their challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
That's a good question. When I was working here in Fremont County at Morton School, which before it was consolidated and became Wind River Schools, that was a really chaotic and controversial time in my first years of teaching. My belief today is that consolidating into larger districts does not necessarily pay off, and what happens is people lose their voice. People need direct access to their school boards. To this day, there are diehards out here in Fremont County who wish that that district had never consolidated. And really, when you take a look at the test scores and the products of the very large districts, the large districts and large schools have a harder time with student performance than they do in smaller districts. And I think that's indicative of how powerful it is to keep schooling as local as possible with as much buy-in as possible. So I'm not in favor of consolidating any more districts at all.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
I'm not in favor either. This is an issue of local control, and very simply, that's the bedrock of how Wyoming operates its school system. If some districts chose from the bottom up to ask to combine, that's their business. But that's not what we need to do for Wyoming. The people of Wyoming don't like that idea. I would stay with local control as it exists.
Thank you. Ms. Balow, rebuttal, yes.
Great, thank you. I want to underscore that any streamlining or sharing of staff or dollars needs to be from the bottom up. It needs to be local control, and that each of the 48 districts needs to have their own school board to make their own unique choices. Additionally, the training that Ms. Lain did on Common Core was done in 2007 before the, 2011 before the adoption of the Common Core.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're at the point in the debate that we think will be fun. We're going to call it the lightning round. We're going to throw short phrase topics to each of you, such as school lunch program, and you'll respond with a short, spontaneous answer. After that, we'll get back to our longer form questions. You ready for the lightning round? I'll ask first. Teacher tenure. Up first, I believe, would be Mr. Winney.
That's a lightning rod in Wyoming.
Okay. Ms. Balow?
Teacher tenure. Local school district policy needs to be in place and enforced to assure that teachers improve from year to year and that ineffective teachers are out-counseled.
Okay. Mrs. Lain.
That's a good question. It kind of ties in with the at-will employment versus the permanent employment at the state. When tenure or permanent employment is there to hide behind for ineffective work, then I am against tenure. Tenure in some cases can be a really good antidote to a capricious and arbitrary leader, but I haven't seen that happen.
Thank you. Tom will ask the next lightning round phrase, and Mrs. Balow, you'll go first.
School vouchers.
School vouchers have not been explored in Wyoming to the extent that they need to. We need to have serious discussions about how school vouchers could work that would not come at a high price to other students or to our school districts.
Great. Mrs. Lain?
I could have used a school voucher the 1 year that I did send one of my children to private school, but nevertheless, I believe that my position as a state superintendent of public instruction is about worrying and working around the public system. And I am opposed to school voucher at this time unless we take a really close look and do a deep study.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
Bureaucrats hate it, Parents like it.
Okay. Aaron, you'll ask the next lightning round question. Sheryl, you'll respond first.
Online education.
Well, distance education is going to be a thing of the future, so that a student in Wamsutter might be able to take calculus with some other students around, and maybe the teacher is housed in Campbell County. This could broaden the options for gifted kids. It could broaden the options for kids who have alternate learning styles and so forth. So distance education and online learning, I think we need to explore. What if a child in Hewlett could take violin lessons from a violinist in Carnegie Hall?
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
We already have some of it. We need to expand it.
Ms. Balow.
Another parental choice. I am in favor of virtual education, and I would like to see the evolution of education progress beyond bricks and mortar traditional classroom and incorporate more virtual classrooms, more virtual education, and other types of education.
Mr. Winney, I'll ask the next question. It's for you. Paraprofessional pay.
Paraprofessional pay should be commensurate with the level of education of those professionals.
Ms. Balow.
Paraprofessionals serve an important function in our schools and in our districts. Pay per employee is locally controlled and should be market rate and competitive with jobs of similar skill and value.
Mrs. Lain.
Paraprofessionals are so important. They often do the teaching when special ed teachers are so booked and busy with the bureaucracy of their roles. But it's a local control issue, and I'd like to see that their pay is commensurate with their value.
Thank you very much. For Mrs. Balow, Tom.
Cindy Hill.
Cindy Hill is the reason that I'm running for this office. There is one of the reasons that I'm running for this office. There has been turmoil and chaos and a lack of leadership in the Department of Education. As a parent, as an educator, and a state leader, I know we can do better.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
Cindy Hill is a staunch and fervent person with a proven record of success wherever she's worked. Remember that during her time, the scores went up, and the chaos we're talking about ensued after SF 104 with headlines and media hype and so on and so forth. So Cindy Hill is not the cause of the chaos that Ms. Balow portrays.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
Cindy Hill sometimes takes the heat for a problem in education that people say goes back 4 years, when in fact it goes back about 10 or more years.
Aaron Schrenk for Mrs. Lain.
Wyoming coal.
Wyoming coal, well, I think it's under siege. I think Obama is attacking Wyoming coal, and that's a frightening thing for Wyoming when our schools and so much of our prosperity depends upon coal, and we have very clean coal in Wyoming. So I want to see that we're using that coal and we're able to.
Thank you, Mr. Winney.
Wyoming coal makes electricity. We're very comfortable that it's always there, and if we're not careful, it's going to start not being there all the time.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
I'm a Campbell County grad. I'm a coal girl. Coal pays for our classrooms. Coal pays for education. We need to make sure that we continue to find more efficient ways to burn coal, but that we uphold the industry as a bedrock of Wyoming's economy.
Thank you very much. One more lightning round question, Mr. Winney. This is for you. Excuse me. School Facilities Commission.
School Facilities Commission, I think, sometimes throws money at facilities, and we have new facilities when some of the facilities in existence would serve.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
School Facilities Commission is responsible for world-class facilities across our state. It's time to look beyond the bricks and mortar and look to alternative ways to educate students within the great facilities that we have.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Lain?
I would like to, I'm very grateful for the wonderful funding we have for new schools, but I'm very concerned when a commission at the state level, which is centralized in Cheyenne, is deciding upon the winners and losers in terms of who gets what schools. And so I would like to think that there's more buy-in on the part of the local boards and local people.
Wonderful. That concludes then our lightning round. We're going to resume some longer form questions. Mr. Lawrence from the Powell Tribune will ask the first question in this series of questions to you, Mr. Winney.
Mr. Winney, school capital construction money, commonly called coal bonus money, has been drying up. How will Wyoming pay for school construction in the coming years?
Our legislature has to keep an eye to windward on federal money, because federal money provides an awful lot of the money that goes into the capital construction budget. And if we're not careful, and the federal funding, for instance, the 49.6% we get drops back to the 1976 level of 37%, that would cause us to get another have to produce another $100 million out of the general fund. And our legislature has to keep an eye to windward on that, or we're going to be in trouble.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Great. It is important for the State Superintendent of Public Instruction to proactively work with our legislature to assure that we do not hit a stone wall if and when the coal bonus money goes away. We need to assure that we have a rainy day account set up for education in case this happens. And we need to assure that our schools, the infrastructure of our schools and our education can handle such a day.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
Well, we'll have to reevaluate our expenditures. We'll have to reevaluate our school facilities expenditures. We'll have to reevaluate and recalibrate our spending. Because just like with anything, any private person, when there is a shortage of money, we have to figure out how to handle it. And so I would like to, I wonder, for instance, about why it is that in this time of wealth that we took the capital innovation, went from $90 million to $250 million. I think that what we often tend to do is just grow the bureaucracy around whatever. And when we build it, we will fill it. So it is very important as a fiscal conservative that we stay within our means and plan for the rainy day, because heaven knows we don't know what the future holds with this.
Thank you. Mr. Winney, a rebuttal.
We do have a rainy day fund. The issue is it isn't inexhaustible. I have seen big budgets tip over from growth rates to negative growth rates, and you would think the world is going to end. And those are the kind of tough decisions that our legislature will face if that happens.
Candidates, we have just under 20 minutes remaining. Aaron Schrank will ask the next question. To you, Mrs. Balow.
Ms. Balow, Wyoming has one of the highest rates of physically restraining students with disabilities in the country. What do you plan to do to stop this disturbing trend?
Okay. Thank you for the question. I am shocked and appalled that Wyoming has one of the highest rates of physical restraint of our students. That should not be happening in Wyoming classrooms. What we need to do is what I've always done: collaborate with groups of people who are stakeholders in this very important issue, including parents, educators, treatment providers, law enforcement, and educators and administrators. We need to come to the table. We need to solve this problem and take immediate action so that it stops.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
I too am surprised about that fact. I think it turns to the point that we need training for our paraprofessionals and training for our staff, training for even our leadership on how it is that we can manage children who may need to have some kind of restraint, some kind of control, far short of physical restraint. Our children need to be safe. All the children need to be safe, and yet we should not be laying hands on children to restrain them.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
Physical restraints, as we use them here, are an easy answer for people in the administration. I see it as an indication that they have not paid attention to business early on with a given young person. And they need to get in there and they need to identify the problems with those young people. And it is partly a health issue sometimes, so you need to coordinate across a couple departments. But you should recognize when you use a physical restraint, it should be a last resort. And what I see going on is all too often it is a first resort.
A rebuttal.
Great. If we're one of the worst in the nation, we need to reach out to the states that are the best in the nation and look at their best practices and incorporate that into the discussions and immediate action that Wyoming must take on this important issue.
Thank you. I'll take the next question for Mrs. Lain. We've heard about many topics tonight. We haven't heard a word about the arts or physical education. Why is it that those topics are buried in discussions about education?
They should not be buried at all. You know what? As a graduate of a Wyoming high school, I need to tell you that what's wonderful about Wyoming high schools, though there is room for improvement, is that whole comprehensive nature. So a student could take theater, and could take ag, and could take orchestra, and could take AP English, and that's a comprehensive high school. And that's what we have in Wyoming, and I think that that's a real value for all of our kids. I think what's happening here is with the Common Core, what we've seen in Wyoming already and nationally is a narrowing of curricular offerings. And we will see, if you think that arts and so forth are buried now, what about when students have to take 2 maths, for instance, and give up one of these electives that we consider orchestra and art and so forth? The whole idea of Wyoming high schools is to create well-rounded Renaissance men and women.
Thank you. Mr. Winney.
As my wife would say about young people, they need to get the wiggles out. Phys ed is important, not just for getting the wiggles out, but for teaching them things about how to live healthy. One of the things I saw as I attended the Naval Academy was the phys ed people telling us how to exercise on ships and inside submarines. That's important to their health. Now let's talk about the arts. The arts show young people how to problem solve in different ways than engineers or mathematicians or other people in the STEM program. That has always been an interesting thing for me to observe in the Navy, because everybody looks at the submarine world as if it's a bunch of engineers. Yet they have always brought in people with other degrees like this precisely because they problem solve differently. This is an important element of our education, and it needs to remain properly funded.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Great. Arts, physical education, and other electives, including career tech and vo-tech education classes, have taken a back burner, and here's why. Our standards are too cumbersome, and our students are over-assessed. Our Hathaway Success curriculum focuses on the core subjects. As soon as our assessments are fewer, our standards are leaner, and our Hathaway Success curriculum honors the arts and career tech ed to a greater degree, we will see those courses come to the front burner again.
Great. A rebuttal, Mrs. Lain.
Well, I so very much agree. I think that our standards do need to be leaner so that they're not narrowing again and eliminating the arts. We have rich resources to have a variety of courses like the arts and the music and the orchestra in Wyoming, and so our children need access to them. But as we experience standards that are heavy duty, that even reach their tentacles down into what to teach every single day, then we're going to see that it's very, very difficult for us to enrich our kids in this way.
Thank you. Next question from Tom.
Mr. Winney, there's an increasingly loud public debate in this country about the public carry of guns. Should guns be allowed inside schools? Should they be allowed in the vehicles parked around the schools by both staff and students?
Well, first off, that belongs with local control with our school boards. If they choose to make that kind of decision, that's up to them. I'm the kind of person that believes in the Second Amendment. A citizen has a right to carry a weapon wherever appropriate, and if a school board chooses to say their teachers could put them on their hip, I guess that's that school board's business. There's something in me that says a teacher shouldn't be standing in front of a classroom with a pistol on their hip. I got that. But that's not the real point. The real point is the authority and the local control of our school boards.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Great. As a successful state government leader and administrator, I do not make unilateral decisions because typically I don't have all the answers or all of the information. This is one of those cases. As a parent, I feel very emotionally about this topic. As a teacher, I feel slightly different. As a leader, I know that the best way to solve this problem or to address this problem is to bring different stakeholders, including law enforcement and educators, to the table to come up with some real solutions for keeping kids safe. What I have heard as I've talked to school resource officers and others in education is that prevention is key. My daughter has a resource officer at her school who spends most of his time building relationships with students, teachers, and families in the communities. This is how we keep kids safe. I don't believe, but I don't have this confirmed by law enforcement and the professionals, that teachers carrying guns will always end up with the good guy winning.
Thank you. Mrs. Lain.
I'm a Second Amendment advocate as a constitutionalist, and I completely agree with Mr. Winney that it is a local control issue. I think that the schools, my grandchildren attend schools all over in Wyoming. I think the school stance is in local parentis, and I expect that school to keep my grandchildren safe, whatever that takes. And as we, right now, we're already experiencing quite a few innovations, if you will, about making schools safer. The schools are more buttoned down. There are security cameras. We do have resource officers in some of the larger schools, and I think that, according to the one I just visited with in the hall, that is a deterrent. So not necessarily to the use of the gun, but just a deterrent to bad behavior in general. So what I'd like to say is that it's a local control issue, but I want my children safe in the schools.
Mr. Winney, a rebuttal.
What is important is to recognize the issue the school boards must wrestle with is precisely that of the bad guys need to think to themselves, there might be somebody in there that can take me out before I try to do what I want to do. And that's what the school boards need to use, whether it's school resource officers or other people in the school that carry firearms. That's the issue they will wrestle with.
Thank you very much. We have one final question before we get to our closing arguments. Aaron Schrank from Wyoming Public Media.
Ms. Balow, what do you think of the way the University of Wyoming College of Education trains teachers, and what can be changed?
I'm a teacher trained at the University of Wyoming, and I can tell you that I'm grateful for the 4 years that I trained at the University of Wyoming and in Wyoming classrooms. I can also share that my real education began day one on the job, either as a student teacher or doing a practicum in school districts. I think there is a great deal of knowledge that can come from the classroom experience at the University of Wyoming, but again, I think that real education comes on day one as a teacher or as a student teacher. What I hear and what I know is that K-12 education, the Department of Education, the state superintendent, and higher education need to have more collaboration and greater partnership when it comes to preparing teachers for Wyoming classrooms. Thank you.
Mrs. Lain.
You know, in time immemorial, the Professional Teaching Standards Board, which handles teacher certification, was housed in the Wyoming Department of Education. And what I think that did was it opened up much better dialogue between the Wyoming Department of Ed, the teacher certification conversation, and the University of Wyoming College of Education program. And I think that's really important because we hear some disturbing things, and though it's only perception, there's a perception out there that the College of Education needs to improve. I would like to make sure that, since we have about a dozen degrees in my family, that the reputation of the University of Wyoming and the College of Education and all the colleges is stellar. So I want to work with the College of Ed to be sure that that is still the case, that it's a wonderful place. There are alternatives to getting teacher certification we ought to look at. For instance, one of my children who is a teacher spent 1 year in student teaching. And I like that approach. I like that he could hit the ground running his first year with all that skill behind him. And I like another suggestion I've heard, which is that elementary educators and special educators have more of a discipline or a major. These are things that we could have a conversation about to beef up our perception of UW.
Thank you, Mrs. Lain. Mr. Winney.
Student teaching is how we bridge those that will become teachers from theory to reality. The reality of the classroom. Not only did I observe my wife over the years teach in a lot of places, I actually saw her as we were going together. Before we got married, I saw her doing her student teaching. That's how you bridge that. Well, I had my own experience. In teaching early in my career, and I had to learn how many times do you go around the block? How do you do classroom control? That's what student teaching does, and I think that is where we start.
Thank you very much. Final rebuttal,
Great.
Mrs. Balow.
I've been fortunate to work with the University of Wyoming and the First Lady on the opening of the Literacy Research Center and Clinic. And just from a peripheral view, I think this is one great place where we can start collaborating better to assure that our teachers coming out of the University of Wyoming have an understanding and a collaboration with local school districts on stellar and quality reading instruction.
Thank you very much.
You.
Candidates, we're nearing the end of our debate, and we are truly thankful for your participation. And now it's your turn to have the last word. In a predetermined order, we now offer each candidate an opportunity for a closing statement. The order that will proceed is Mr. Winney, followed by Ms. Balow, and finally Mrs. Lain. Mr. Winney, your closing statement.
We have a decade-long slide in performance in our schools. Our legislature has tried to solve that by getting into the details, and I've objected to that in public comment. The people of Wyoming face a decision. Are they going to just run the current system, perhaps run it a little bit better, perhaps do the same kinds of things and keep turning the wheels? Or are they going to change the equation? I have long thought about a quote from a man named William J.H. Betker. Back in the early 1900s, he said, "You can employ men and hire hands to work for you, but if you want them to work with you, you must win their hearts." This is a guy that I believe inspired some of the things you heard from Ronald Reagan. Let's be clear, teachers are the front-line soldiers of education. Everyone else is support staff. So we got to be careful that the bureaucracy doesn't run them into the ground. That's one of the complaints that I hear almost universally from teachers at their front doors these last couple months. And bureaucracies use lots of different hand wave and words. They use things like robust. They use words like empower that are supposed to convey things to people, when in fact to a bureaucrat it means something entirely different. And so where do we go? We got to get the legislature backed away from specifying the details, and we got to make sure that we don't overload our teachers with bureaucracy.
Mr. Winney, thank you. Mrs. Balow.
Wyoming cannot handle 4 more years of a Lain and Hill administration. Tonight I'd like to know if Ms. Lain will apologize to the taxpayers of Wyoming for breaking state law when she offered a no-contract bid to her daughter. I also would like to know where teachers, the thousands of hardworking teachers, students, and families fit into the equation of Ms. Lain accepting responsibility for raising test scores in schools and across the state. Over the past 2 years, I've saved millions of taxpayer dollars. I've received a national award for streamlining work and reducing worker errors. I've put contracts out for competitive bid, and I've removed barriers in communities to make government work better for people. I am a proven, a competent, and a fit administrator and leader. I have the credibility with diverse stakeholders and the education experience needed to lead in these complex and challenging times. It is for these reasons that I ask for the vote of Wyomingites on August 19th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Balow. And Mrs. Lain.
Thank you. I want to thank PBS for this event and for all of you who've listened and taken part, but mostly I'd like to say thank you to the thousands of Wyoming kids I've taught. They taught me more than I taught them, I dare say, and it's been my privilege to work with, not direct, but work with thousands of Wyoming teachers who show me every day what commitment is all about. And what inspired me to run are the teachers and the students and their parents. These people know that no matter the pressure on classroom teachers, no matter the rhetoric in the newspapers, no matter the debate rhetoric, no matter the bureaucracy surrounding school that changes with testing and programs and way too much testing, most of the teachers in our classrooms in Wyoming think of our kids first. And they're getting ready right now for school to start. The facts show it. An alternative school in Sheridan had the highest ACT scores in the state, an alternative school. Wyoming 4th graders were 3rd highest in the nation in math. Do you know that many of our one-room schools in Wyoming have a 100% proficient, the one-room schools, when across the nation rural schools are said to be more failing? We are stellar in one-room schools. And at Arapahoe School, where the WDE was asked to come in and help, and the rules required us to do so. Kids grew in reading in 3rd grade from 18% to 58%, and no, Sheryl Lain does not take credit for that. It's the work of wonderful teachers everywhere, and including those at Arapahoe. But you know what? No one can ever take that learning away, in spite of the chaos ensued from SF 104. So I want to remind you again that during the 2 years, all the scores went up in our state. And you know, the purpose of public school is to enhance preserve our republic. We want an enlightened populace.
Mrs.
Our way
Lain,
of life depends on it.
Thank you very much.
I want to continue to achieve that with you.
Thank you so much. That's it for our debate. And I want to, again, thank the candidates for this lively debate and offer my special thanks to Tom Lawrence from the Powell Tribune and to Aaron Schenk from Wyoming Public Media. And also thanks to our Wyoming PBS crew, who are working very hard behind the scenes to keep the cameras working, the microphones working, and the teleprompters teleprompting. We'll be back in just a moment with the Republican candidates for the United States House of Representatives, and tomorrow, join us for more debates when we'll hear from the Republican candidates for Wyoming Secretary of State. That debate starts tomorrow at 7 p.m. Also, plan to join us this fall when Wyoming PBS will bring together general election candidates for another series of engaging live debates. From all of us at Wyoming PBS, thanks again and good evening. Candidates, thank you very much.
For more information on this and other local programs, visit our website,